Hello, good morning, everybody. On the live here, joining me today will be Candace, who is our expert in what it is that we're going to be talking about today, which is PPE, etc., etc. So I'm just going to get Candace online and get a few people to join the live. If anybody does miss the live, you will be able to watch it again in a replay anyway. So we're really hoping that we can help you guys out today with some of your just Candace. Okay.
Hi.
Yes, hi Candace, how are you doing?
Oh, fine, thanks, and you?
All right, thanks.
We just get me in a good spot here.
Yes, so the less light behind you is great.
Yeah, fine, but I'm gonna have to hold it.
Being here today. So I know there's not a lot of people yet, and there might be some that will still come a bit later. So
No problem.
I wanted to just start by telling everybody that we were actually doing this live through a Facebook group called South Africa. And this was really started to showcase styles of South African talent to consumers. So in other words, the group itself has consumers, brands, stylists, nail techs, all kinds of people on there. So we've got professionals and we've got consumers. So it's a very good platform to be on and a good place to showcase our hairstyle. Obviously, then, when the whole lockdown issue happened, things changed a little bit. I don't know if you got a little bit of noise coming from your side there, Candace.
No, I don't, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, that's all right. Maybe it was me. There you go. And so, yes, and so it evolved, obviously, when the lockdown happened, and it wasn't what it first started out as, but it was a fantastic place. I was so happy that it was a platform where we could actually help people out. What a weird time it was and has been up until now, where nobody knew if we were going to come back, when we were going to come back. And then there was talk of protocols and PPE, and I think there was quite a bit of confusion and that kind of thing. So what we want to do today is run through some of what you need to do. So between Candace and I, she is the expert. She'll tell you a bit about what she offers, and we do help people put together their PPE and do their risk assessment and that kind of thing. So we welcome any questions at this stage, and if we don't get your question, we will answer it later on in the comments. So I just want to ask Candace if you can just tell us what it is that you're qualified in and a little bit of what you've done until now.
Thank you, Ush. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
So I have what we call a SAMTRAC health and safety qualification. It is a very well sought after qualification in South Africa as well as internationally. And what it entails is a series of health and safety courses that are done over a 10-day period and has a very high expectancy in terms of a pass mark. So a SAMTRAC qualification is usually taken on by somebody who turns health and safety into their profession. It's not just a volunteer type of work, but it's your profession. So health and safety is my profession. What this also enables me to do is to offer risk assessments. So what that means is, in terms of SAMTRAC, I have been sufficiently trained on how to do varying risk assessments across many different industries. I've also gone on to complete my COVID workplace preparedness training with the Labour Guide, which I've just also recently done about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, and I received my certificate of completion. So what that training is specifically around and why it's applicable to what we're doing now is, as it speaks for itself, it's very much around the COVID. So in terms of that training, it was very focused on the Department of Labor and Occupation and their requirements of every South African employer, as well as the expectations on the employee. So basically anybody residing in the country, what are the protocols? What are the expectations in terms of managing COVID?
Okay.
So what I then did is I have married not only the Department of Labor and Occupations requirements, which is a national requirement, but also the protocols of the EOHCB and of SASP. So there are many areas where the protocols overlap, and as most people will know, fairly recently there was a document produced which is about 87 pages. It looked very overwhelming initially, but a lot of it was a lot of inside information, clarity around COVID and general management. So a good portion of the document was about information. The second half were the actual protocols. Subsequent to that, a new gazette has been published, which is about 16 pages, which speaks solely of the protocols for the hair care industry, the beauty industry, as well as the tattooing, both in formal and informal areas.
Yes.
So
sorry,
the service that
also, just quickly before you carry on, there's that you had a history in your background of working within the industry. So I know you have worked for some of the manufacturers and you've worked with salons and stuff before. So it's not an industry that's something that you don't know about, you know, which is very, very handy for what we're doing.
Yeah. I have experience in the hair care industry. I've been a sales rep in the industry. I've done brand and marketing management in the hair care industry as well. Always been a passion, but I've never really quite got myself to going further in the industry, but I can support you through the health and safety side.
Yeah. I'm so glad someone's got their head screwed on with that, because yeah, it's not really my forte. Anything that seems legal can seem overwhelming, and I think everybody really appreciates the support. So yeah, sorry if you want to carry on with what you were doing, then we can ask some questions if we don't get to some of them.
Sure. So just some clarity around what I'm able to offer is there needs to be an understanding out there that there is a requirement from the Department of Labor and Occupation, and there is a requirement from the hair care and beauty industry in terms of COVID protocols. And like I mentioned a little earlier, that they do in some instances overlap. There are some other areas that I have looked through the hairdressing protocols and they're not mentioned, but this is where people need to be a bit more clued up. Is just because they're not mentioned, an employer cannot then claim that they didn't know about the protocols per se. It's a little bit of a tricky area and it can seem a little bit unfair, but this is why I'm here, is to answer these questions and to, from an employer's perspective, give more clarity around what the Department of Labor and Occupation requires for COVID.
Yes, okay, yeah, there's some grey areas.
Yeah, so for instance, the Department of Labor requires that there be a cleaning register. In the hairdressing protocols, the cleaning is mentioned, but it's not said in the protocols that it needs to be on a register or you have to have some sort of proof that you are actually cleaning. So what happens in these instances where the confusion is going to come in is that if an inspector from the Department of Labor and Occupation comes and visits a salon and he says or she says, "Where is your COVID management plan?" The person in the hairdresser or in the store may panic because they don't necessarily know what is the COVID management plan. What they're saying that they have the sanitizers, they have the masks, they're following the hairdressing protocols, which is good and is expected. But the inspector himself will be looking for additional measures that have been taken. And these additional measures translate into the paperwork and the documentation that we will be looking for. And this is where I have married the two COVID protocol aspects.
Okay. Okay, so that sounds brilliant. So not only do they have to have all their paperwork in order, they need to have control. They have to have somebody in the salon that's appointed and that is in control of certain aspects that needs to happen at certain times of the day or certain times of the week or of the month, and they have to keep stock of all sorts of things, and as well as control the people coming in and out the door and getting their information, that kind of thing.
That is correct. So that person will be titled as the appointed COVID manager. There is a specific document that needs to be completed and kept on file that the owner of the salon officially and legally appoints the COVID manager. So when an inspector comes into the salon, they're going to ask for the appointed COVID manager, and they're going to want to see the supporting document that states that Joe Soap is the appointed COVID manager. They will not accept that randomly you point to someone and say, oh, but this is the COVID manager. They want to see the documentation. And this is where it starts to get tricky, is because if you don't know what documentation is needed and how it needs to be completed and when, if you are inspected, which I have a sinking feeling that this particular industry will be in a way an easy target, and I'm hoping that I'm wrong on this, people are going to be asking for that documentation.
Okay, so just briefly, what could happen if they do come in and ask for that? They will just be fined.
Well, as we already know, some salons that were operating during the lockdown have received a 50,000 Rand fine.
Yeah.
So the opportunity for being fined is there.
Yes.
We must not think that even though we're putting protocols in place and we're doing what we think we should be doing, we aren't at risk of getting a fine.
Yes.
What the consequences are is, yes, to have to receive a fine, and in some instances, which could happen, they would actually close the salon in the very moment. So your clients would get up from the chair with their cape on and walk out the salon. So that is very extreme. However, I can't say at this particular stage what would warrant an action like that, but the business will definitely anticipate a financial penalty.
Yes, and we don't know. There's a lot of unknowns throughout the whole COVID thing, so we don't know for sure. So moving on to some other things. So there's a process that happens when people come through the door, and I think what stylists and salon owners will want to know is probably a kind of a list of what is the best PPE. There's so many adverts out there. There's thermometers. Then someone says you don't need to use a thermometer. There's shoe covers, but you don't need to use shoe covers. You know what I'm saying? You need to use the 3-ply mask. If they bring their own mask, is that okay? Do they need to use a disposable one? Are those things you can give us some insight into now?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, sure. I'm very happy to do that. So let's just start with the basics. We all know that hand sanitizer is a top priority, and that it needs to be at least a 70% isopropyl alcohol content. What is important, and this is something that gets covered in the actual health and safety file which I supply, is what we call the MSDS document. That is your medical safety data sheet, MSDS.
Okay.
That will be part of the inspection of your file, and that has to accompany the sanitizer that you purchase to prove that it does have 70% alcohol, as well as what other ingredients are in the product that render it to be effective. So hand sanitizer is a definite.
So when somebody
In the
orders that
current
from
protocol,
sorry,
beg your pardon?
Supplier, do they have to ask them to see the paperwork on that, or is it printed on the bottle?
Yes. Sometimes it's printed on the bottle, but there is a scope of information that needs to be visible and to be supplied. If the purchaser buys if the salon buys directly from a supplier, they should be asking this, and they need to keep that on hand.
Okay, it's for the documentation of it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that's the sanitizer. So, all right. So that gets sprayed.
So that's the sanitizer.
Is that just for hands, or do you use the same one on a countertop?
Right. So we are all very aware at the moment that things are really expensive, and the hair care industry has taken a huge knock in terms of revenue. So hand sanitizer can be used solely for hands. It can also be used on immediate countertops. Okay. However, in the gazetted protocols, you can also use bleach, which can be watered down, but in a specific ratio. This is